Great. Okay, I think we'll get started. So welcome everyone. My name's Tony Davis. I'm president of the MIT Alumni Golfers Association, MITAGA for short. We have about 500 alumni as members and hopefully increasing. We do a range of activities and programs. One is running a global tournament each year, which is now hybrid, both in person and then virtual and handing in scores. So more details on that will come out as we get close to spring in the Northern Hemisphere. And we have an active program of webinars, of which this evening is one. So in the past, we've had renowned golf course designer and architects speak with us, including Cynthia Dye and Tom Doak. We've had people who rate golf courses for the industry magazines. Our most recent event was MIT's own alumna, Kim Din, who played in this year's US Women's Open. We heard about her experience there, including her practice round with Nelly Korda, amongst others. And then coming up on April 3rd, we have Mark Brody, famous for the strokes gained system. So all sorts of things coming up. We hope you'll join us for that, future events and ones after that. This evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are, we are going to have a presentation for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then you'll be able to ask questions. You'll be on mute, so questions are to be typed into the Q&A box, which for most people is at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in at any stage along the way, but we'll actually wait until the end of the presentation for delving into the Q&A box and answering as many questions as we can. So that's the format and rules of the game for this evening. So I'll now hand over to my fellow MITAGA board member, Ken Wang, to introduce today's speaker and the webinar. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Tony. Can you hear me, everyone? You good?
Good.
I'm really pleased to introduce Hannah Fleming. She is the Learning and Access Curator at the R&A World Golf Museum. The R&A, for those of you who aren't familiar, really stands for the Royal Nation Golf Club, which is even more commonly, I think, referred to as St. Andrews. It's really the home of golf. The museum itself is owned by the R&A. It was formerly the British Golf Museum. I guess it was started, as I understand, in 1990. And it's located literally next to the old course at St. Andrews, just opposite the R&A clubhouse. So it's really a very integrated part of the entire St. Andrews situation. And it's dedicated to recording, preserving the history of, and the evolution, I think, of golf, not only for the local community and for the British Isles, but also for the world. Hannah runs and curates the numerous educational programs, of which there are many involving not only just kind of the general public, but also specifically children, families, and women's golf, which I think are topics that are very dear to her heart. And as I say, they have numerous programs that they kind of hold and they kind of conduct, and she's the one responsible for putting those together and administering them. She's also, I guess, an assistant curator for the museum as a whole, as well as being the curator for the Learning and Access. And she's also a scholar. She has a master's degree in the arts from St. Andrews University. She has been actively involved in research and remains actively involved in research in golf-related subjects for the entire R&A. And having said that, I think we'll get into the program. We welcome Hannah and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ken and Tony and Jackie, for hosting me this evening or this afternoon. It's a real honour to be part of your programme, particularly the names that you've mentioned that have spoken previously and that are to come in your programme. As you mentioned, I am the Learning and Access Curator here at the museum in St Andrews in Fife. This is my 20th year working at the museum and my 20th year working in golf heritage. And when I started, I began at the museum reception and I learned from speaking to our visitors, to speaking to people like yourselves who are golf enthusiasts. And it quickly became apparent just how much people adore the sport and how passionate they are about it. And if I hadn't started to work here, a whole section of Scottish history, British history, would have gone unknown to me. Apart from watching golf on the television as a child with my parents, grandparents, I had no physical attachment to the sport. But working here, I have grown an appreciation not only for golf, but the importance of sport as a way of learning and as a way of being within the community. So let me get started. All my details are on screen, by the way, and I'll put them at the end. So if anybody wants to get in contact with me afterwards, that'd be great. So much of early golf history has been the subject of debate, with multiple myths and stories being weaved into our collective consciousness. The golf historian community around the world has worked hard to produce research and to clarify much of the folklore of the sport. I'm here today to provide a small glimpse into this rich history, but there's continually new material being produced every year, which has helped to inform our understanding of how the sport has developed. I'm hugely grateful to this community, much of whom I'm lucky enough to call my friends or fellow golf geeks. This is a term that I have coined for our local historians, enthusiasts, and writers who are producing research every year on the subject. And I do, in fact, have a Golf Geeks group, which you're all welcome to become part of. So my presentation today will focus on the key elements that I believe make up the importance of Scottish golf, and looking at a chronology of Scottish golf history and the development of the sport. For me, it's the land, the equipment, the people, and the championships that have made it so important. And throughout my presentation, I'll be using imagery and photographs from our collections, both from the museum and the club's collection, because you're right, the museum was started in 1990 by the Royal and Ancient Golf Club, and they set up a charitable trust for the building of the museum. And as a curator, we work not only in the museum, but in the Royal and Ancient Golf Club and with the R&A as our governing body in this part of the world. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding golf is actually just how it began. Throughout history, various forms of ball and stick games have been played all around the world. In medieval Netherlands, the game of golf with a C or golf with a K looked and sounded remarkably similar to Scottish golf. Nevertheless, it was the ancient game that was first discerned in Scottish archival and later object records that was called golf, gowf, golf, golf, lots of different dialects saying it in lots of different ways. But this has been shown to be the origin of the game that we play today. It's sometimes hard to picture late medieval Scotland. It's a challenge even for those of us who live here and are from here. What was it actually like? People battled disease and the threat of war. It's quite incredible to think that this sport has thrived into this multi-million-pound or dollar industry. This image is from the club's collection and is from the 1610s, and it shows this game of golf being played as a winter game when their canals froze over. The earliest known written reference to golf is from 1457. It's the act of King James II of Scotland, who banned the playing of football or soccer and golf. What was his reasoning? These pastimes were distracting James's subjects from training in archery. This was essential for the defence of the country. This handwritten document, which is in the records of the National Archives of Scotland in Edinburgh, shows the threat felt in Scotland from south of the border. Now, even I am not going to attempt to read out the Scots language here, so I'll read it out in translation. Football and golf should be utterly condemned and stopped, and that a pair of targets should be made up at all parish churches, and shooting should be practised each Sunday. And concerning football and golf, we ordain that those found playing the games be punished by the local barons, and failing them, by the king's officers. There were similar acts laid out in 1471 and then in 1491, with that final one specifying that a fine of 40 shillings be put in place for anyone found playing golf. This suggests to me that perhaps the Scots needed that extra means of discouragement to play golf, to not play golf. The word golf itself being used here could refer to the long-skilled version of the sport, or more likely, a version played in the churchyards themselves in Scotland. This was a much more affordable and accessible pitch and putt style game, a short game. It would have been played on the one day of the week when people weren't working, a Sunday, and before the Reformation, churchgoers would use this day for the only opportunity to really meet and relax. They would have a day out. There would be meetings, drinking, sport, before and after the church services. The church and taverns were in the centre of the villages, and the churchyard was a natural gathering place, with land available for this kind of sport. They would play with simple equipment in the spaces available. However, there were those who had access to play on seaside links. These were the royalty, courtiers, and aristocracy. These golfers used expensive, custom-made equipment, and the form is more likely to closely resemble the sport we see today. Prohibitions were lifted in the early 1500s, and soon after we start to see the first mentions of golfing locations across the country, including in 1503 when King James IV spent some money on the purchase of golf balls and clubs while at Falkland Palace in Fife. In St Andrews, Archbishop John Hamilton was given a charter to establish a rabbit warren on the north part of the links in 1552. This is really the starting point of formalised golf in St Andrews. The charter confirmed the rights of the local populace to use this rugged sandy turf that linked the sea with the arable land. People could play golf at St Andrews, and within a little more than a century, it was already known as the metropolis of golfing. The landscape itself, for me, is the key to understanding the lure of Scottish golf. The links land is naturally undulating, sandy, and usually windy, even in the summer. It provides the perfect challenge. The meaning of the word changes over time. Originally, a links was any rough, grassy area between the sea and the land. The word itself is derived from the Anglo-Saxon word link of about 931 AD, meaning a ridge. Later, the word was used to denote any common grassy area, and the term today, often using the links, is commonly used to refer to any golf course you're playing. True link soil is sandy, and because of the lack of moisture, the grass tends to have short blades and long roots. The grass in the rough is often long and wispy, which makes play very difficult, even in a good lie. Links courses drain well and provide a very firm golfing surface all year round, and are thus the preferred choice for a lot of good golfers. The combination of the links and the feathery ball were probably the making of golf, while other similar games died out for lack of suitable place to play. It also had the added attraction of being out of sight when you were playing golf and you shouldn't have been. Because there was no mechanical grass cutters before the mid-19th century, golf was predominantly played in winter when the grass was naturally short following animal grazing. The links area on the east coast of Scotland was accessible to golfers of the time, and it also coincides with the area of minimal rainfall in Scotland. And with the better drainage, links land is therefore more suitable for winter play and was less damaging to those early leather-stitched golf balls that were used. Now, one of the myths from this early period of golf history that I sadly must dispel this evening is that Mary Queen of Scots was the first female golfer. It's almost a presumed fact that she was the first woman to hit a golf ball. The story goes that a few days after the murder of her husband, Lord Darnley, in 1566, Mary was seen exercising opening at Pall Mall and golf. Recent study by one of my golf geeks, Neil Miller, in his book Early Golf, Royal Myths and Ancient Mysteries, was debunked by many claims of this period. The claims linking Mary to the game of golf, almost all of these lack any credible evidence, he says. In fact, all of the claims appear to derive from a single source, a handwritten manuscript that is of doubtful reliability. It is a document that was prepared by Mary's enemies with the aim of demonstrating her complicity in the murder of her husband. Her exercise would have been taken place at Seaton Palace near Edinburgh during a time when she might have been expected to be mourning the death of her husband. All the suggestions that she was a golf enthusiast and playing at multiple locations across the country sadly remain undocumented. Thomas Kincaid, a medical student at Edinburgh University, kept a diary in 1687 and 1688, which contains early descriptions of a golf swing and a discussion on the merits of handicapping. Although the extent of the golfing activity is not known, enough was being played in St Andrews in 1691 for the city to be described as the metropolis of golfing. By that date, golf had been mentioned in at least 27 Scottish towns and cities over the previous 200 years. The earliest geographical location given for golf was actually at Perth in 1502. We then follow with locations such as Brechin, Barry, Aberdeen, St Andrews, Leith and Edinburgh in 1554. In the early 18th century, John Mackenzie, a lawyer, sent 3 sons to the University of St Andrews. He employed a tutor, James Morris, to supervise them. One of Morris's duties was to keep a detailed financial account of the boys' expenditures between 1711 and 1716. The lads were all keen golfers, and apparently so were their teachers, because Morris complained to his employer that since the day became longer, the masters of the university are frequently at golf in the afternoon instead of their studies. From Morris's accounts, it can be learned that balls came in 2 quantities, costing 2 shillings and 1 shilling respectively. Wooden clubs cost 12 shillings and iron ones were double the price at 24 shillings. To put these in perspectives, in the same accounts, a pair of gloves cost 4 shillings, a pair of shoes cost 5 shillings, and a good shave 3 shillings. There's much evidence of golf being played on an informal basis in these early decades of the 18th century. However, there are no surviving rules or records of golfing societies from before 1744. The social attitudes of the 18th century created an environment where people began forming societies for a variety of reasons. These include political, philosophical, literary activities, and they often were accompanied by lots of food and lots of drink. Prior to the 18th century, there had been a long tradition of town-sponsored sporting events such as archery, shooting, and horse racing. Before the start of the competition, there was often a procession during which the trophy was carried to the location of the event. In many instances, the winner would place a medal on the trophy to mark his victory. The Royal Company of Archers was founded in 1676, and aspects of their competitions influenced the annual challenge for the Edinburgh Silver Club, which started in 1744. Many of the participants in the early years of the golf challenges for the Silver Club in Edinburgh and St Andrews were also successful archers. Most golfing societies dined at various inns or taverns, usually by rotation. In Edinburgh, at the Honourable Company and the Edinburgh Burgess, they actually purchased their own inns, and these were let out with 1 or more rooms reserved for meetings on club days. The frequency of meetings varied greatly, although most societies tried to meet monthly. The average attendance at these meetings was between 10 and 12 members. The first society to have some form of ballot for election of the new members was the Honourable Company in Edinburgh in 1764. Conversely, St Andrews did not introduce a formal ballot until 1806. This is a photograph that I took in Market Street in St Andrews of the Cross Keys. There is further down the street a modern Cross Keys building, but this is where the members of the Society of St Andrews Golfers would meet for their meetings, and you can see the walkway through the back where the horse and cart would go. In this period, Blackheath, Glasgow, Musselburgh, St Andrews and the Honourable Company each played an annual challenge for a silver club or cup. The winner of the challenge would place a silver ball on the silver club and become captain for the next year, except at Musselburgh, where the captain placed a medal on a silver cup. The remaining societies elected their leaders, who were often called apprentices, perhaps where we get the idea and title president of a golf club. A typical day at the golf consisted of play on the links, followed by a gathering in a meeting place. Business was usually transacted before the meal. Tee-off times varied between 11 and 1 p.m., 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., with a meal usually beginning between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., lasting about 2.5 hours. Once the dinner began, the captain or presses had to keep a firm hand on the amount being eaten or drunk, as he was often personally responsible for anything consumed above the pre-agreed limits. The golf and the meal went hand in hand, and members were constantly being fined for playing golf and not dining. Members frequently bet on matches, and bet books were kept by the societies to record these. Both the Honourable Company and Musselburgh put limits on the stakes, but these were sometimes ignored. The earliest mention of wearing a uniform dates from 1764 at the Honourable Company. These had a decidedly military look to them, in the tradition of the Royal Company of Archers. Uniform jackets were mainly red, but some clubs were blue, green, and they varied, but red is the most popular colour. The Society of St Andrews Golfers was the first known society to play for a trophy in addition to the annual challenge. In 1771, they played for a gold medal, which was kept by the winner. So far this evening, I've spoken about golf from the male perspective, apart from perhaps debunking Mary Stewart as the first female golfer. I want to take a moment now to discuss the earliest examples of women taking part in the sport. A few years ago, a new first definitive reference to women playing golf was discovered in the Caledonia Mercury newspaper. On the 24th of April 1738, two married women are reported to have played a match on Brunsfield Links in Edinburgh, with their husbands acting as caddies. The Edinburgh paper reported that the match attracted quite a crowd and there was gambling. As Neil Miller and David Hamilton wrote in the British Golf Collector Society magazine Through the Green in March 2015, the seemingly disparaging reference to the women being half naked could be seen as insulting or alternatively as being affectionately light-hearted. However, this comment is unlikely to have been inspired by anything more scandalous than a brief glimpse of a woman's ankle below a long skirt. That the women were described as viragos reflects the view that these were women who had the confidence and temerity to participate in a man's sport. That they played the game manfully could be viewed as either a compliment or may simply reflect the fact that golf was not considered an activity for women in the 18th century. Incidentally, the description some 60 years later of the Fisher Row fishwives at Musselburgh playing golf in 1795, presumably at the course at Musselburgh, also emphasises their masculine attributes. As they do the work of men, their manners are masculine, and their strength and activity is equal to their work. Their amusements are of the masculine kind. On holidays, they frequently play at golf. This was a description from the Reverend Alexander Carlyle, who was minister at Inveresk and a golfer himself. He wrote about the fishwives in his statistical account of Scotland. These activities were formally supported, and on New Year's Day 1811, the club, who became Royal Musselburgh, sponsored the women's competition with meaningful prizes. A creel, which is the woven fishing basket that you can see in the photograph, and two of the best Barcelona silk handkerchiefs. The first known rules of golf date from 1744 and were formulated for the annual challenge for the Edinburgh Silver Club. 6 other societies, apart from the Honourable Company, issued their own rules of golf. And here on screen we have the Society of St Andrews Golfers' first minute book. And on the very first page of their first minute book, they wrote their 13 articles and laws in playing the golf. And this item is on display in our museum for our visitors to see. Nice and simple, just 13 rules to follow for the competition. Throughout the 18th century, the various societies amended their individual rules to meet new situations as they arose. Rules drafted by other clubs were referred to and modified where these were thought useful. By 1754, St Andrews consisted of 12 holes, 10 of which were played twice, making a round of 22 holes in all. The course wends its way out along the coast and then turns back into the clubhouse. The instructions for playing the first competition were contained references to some of the old course holes, which are still in existence. The courses themselves were very different to those today, a great deal rougher with much narrower fairways. There were no recognised teeing grounds, and as it says in the first rule, you must tee your ball within a club length of the hole. Aside from a course, however crude, the two other essentials needed to play golf were the balls and the clubs. So let's look at in detail about the equipment. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, ball makers were often described as cordonniers, who were leather workers and shoemakers, and so it's extremely likely that golf balls had leather cases. Thomas Kincaid again describes golf balls as being made of hard, thick leather, sometimes painted white with white lead to make them more water resistant. The earliest mention of feathers being used as the material for stuffing the golf balls dates from 1724. A great quantity of feathers was forced into the leather case. This was done by using an iron rod with a wooden handle, often pressed against the chest. It was slow, hard work, and in 1838 it was reckoned that a good ball maker could produce 50 to 60 balls in a week. In 1779, it was estimated that a feather ball flew about 200 yards. A more scientific trial was conducted in Glasgow in 1786. A player hit 5 shots under the observation of 2 colleagues who proceeded to measure the shots. The average for the 5 was 193 yards and 1 foot. Some 50 years later, Samuel Messot set the known record for distance, reputedly hitting a ball over 360 yards at St Andrews. The feather ball had a relatively short lifespan, however, which depended on the thickness of the leather casing. The balls would often become soft in wet conditions or be damaged by iron clubs, and they sometimes lost their shape after just a few rounds. From the 17th century, there's evidence of the manufacture of play clubs for driving, spoons for lofted shots, and a variety of putters for use on or near the greens. These clubs are described as long-nosed, as they are longer from heel to toe than modern clubs, and the head is more slender in shape. You can see, I hope, in this image of the Royal Troon clubs, which are the oldest known clubs in the world. We have 6 long-nosed woods and 2 heavy wrought irons. The range of wooden clubs was needed because of the crude and heavy irons of the time were difficult to swing and could easily split the balls. Iron clubs were only used as a last resort to remove the ball from wheel ruts or rough ground where a wooden club might be damaged. So these Troon clubs, as I said, they date from the late 1600s. Hugh Philp began repairing golf clubs in St Andrews in 1812, and in 1819 he was appointed clubmaker to the Society of St Andrews Golfers. Although his appointment lapsed in the 1820s, many members of the society still sought out his clubs. Those made by him are considered to be among the finest ever crafted. Some of the earliest references to the game in North America come from the descriptions and lists of equipment. In a Leith Customs account book from 1743, there's a list of the cargo of the Magdalene bound for Charleston, South Carolina, which features two boxes with 8 dozen golf clubs and 3 gross golf balls. Shipments of clubs and balls by the dozen from Greenock on the west coast of Scotland for Virginia also appear in 1750. These exports confirm the early existence of the game in the American South prior to any organised clubs. It was potentially being exported to a merchant with customers waiting rather than to individual golfers. There was, in fact, a merchant in Charleston who stocked Scottish goods, and when he died in 1764, there was in his inventory a dozen goof sticks, as they were written, and balls. There appears to have been a club in Charleston active from 1786 for about 23 years at Harleston's Green. Members of the local gentry would meet midweek and work their golf around the harvest. There are newspaper advertisements of a club at Savannah, Georgia from 1797, and this was mostly for the merchants of the area. Whether the games played at this time resembled the sport we know today has been questioned, and reports fade until well into the new century. The birth of American golf in a lasting and formal way comes in the 1880s with the formation of the St. Andrews Golf Club at Yonkers, New York in 1888, but we will return to that. Excuse me a moment. In 1833, King William IV consented to become the patron of Perth Golfing Society, which thus became the first Royal Society. This irritated the golfers in St Andrews who'd been around a bit longer. The King also became patron of the Society of St Andrews Golfers in 1834 after a lot of badgering back and forth. The title was changed to the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St Andrews, just to make that difference. He became patron of the club, and every monarch since him has held that title. By the 1820s, the captains of virtually all the known golf clubs were chosen by election rather than competition for the silver club. Competitions for the club medal, usually gold or silver, were held to determine the club champion. Golf was still growing very slowly. By 1849, the number of active clubs was still only about 23. 10 years later, this had increased to about 35, and there was still no overall governing body for the game. The earliest known reference to a professional tournament in St Andrews dates from the 3rd of September 1819. It was recorded that sweepstakes contributed by R&A members were appointed to be played for by the ballmakers, clubmakers and caddies, which on the first day of the club's autumn meeting. I'm now going to talk a little bit about the role of a professional. This portrait is of Alan Robertson, probably the greatest St Andrews golfer and probably one of the first golf professionals. Robertson won multiple professional events, so much so that in the Fifeshire Journal in 1842, they reported that Alan Robertson was prohibited by his brethren from competing for these stakes on account of his superior play, it being their impression that they would have no chance in any contest in which Alan took part. Professional matches in the 1830s with players such as Willie Dunn and Alan Robertson, and then became more popular and common in the 1840s with Tom Morris and Willie Park Sr. They competed over various links at St Andrews, Musselburgh and North Berwick usually, Alan and Tom partnering and were really unbeatable. These images that I'm now going to show come from our glass plate negative collection. St Andrews is a well-known focus for the earlier beginnings of photography. Thanks to those in the University of St Andrews, we have some exceptional early photography. By the 1850s, we have Thomas Roger working in the town, and he is reportedly the one that took these early photographs of the golf professionals. Alan and Tom Morris Sr. played Willie and Jamie Dunn over 3 courses in 1849, when apparently £400 was stacked on the outcome. I did check this in the Bank of England's inflation calculator, and it worked out to be something crazy like £44,000 in today's money, which seems mind-boggling. By the 1850s, professional matches were becoming a regular feature of the R&A spring and autumn meetings. When the professionals partnered members and also played against each other, they became the superstars of the day. The word professional seems to have come into common use at this point. Prior to that, who were not gentlemen golfers were described by the manner in which they earn money in golf. Ball makers, club makers, caddies, and greenkeepers. Very few could make a living through playing golf alone, and it was these men that would go on to play in the Open Championship. Alan Robertson was undoubtedly the greatest player of this group. As I said, he was really unbeaten. He was also responsible for making the golfing arrangements at the R&A spring and autumn meetings, for setting members' tee times, as well as overseeing the conversion of the double greens at St Andrews in 1856 and 57 alongside Tom Morris, and worked on other courses such as Crail and at Cooper. He was the first player to score under 80 on the old course, scoring a 79 the year before he died in 1858. He was most famous, however, for his work as a ball maker, a feather golf ball maker, perhaps the finest of his era. Tom Morris Sr. worked with Alan for 10 years, starting as a teenager apprentice, and took on and learned all the skills and the tricks of the trade. The change of ball to the gutta percha ball revolutionised golf. These balls were denser and harder and changed the long-nosed clubs to become shorter, bulger-headed clubs. Gutties made golf more democratic as they became more affordable and were more durable. You could purchase them across the country, not just directly from the maker. Famously, Alan and Tom Morris had a falling out when Alan caught his colleague using the rival gutty ball. Tom had been playing with his friend, Mr. Campbell of Saddle, when he lost all of his featheries. His friend offered him a gutty. Tom remembered, "I took to it once. As we were playing in, it so happened that we met Alan Robertson coming out, and someone told him that I was playing a very good game with one of the new gutty balls. And I could see fine from his face, the expression on his face, that he did not like it at all. And when we met afterwards in his shop, we had some words about the matter, and there and then we parted company, I leaving his employment." The extent of the argument may have been exaggerated, as the two men continued to play together in matches. However, Tom moved his family to Prestwick in 1851 to become keeper of the links and lay out their 12-hole course under the instruction of James Ogilvy Fairley. This was a huge decision at the time to move to the West Coast, where golf hadn't really taken off in the same way. Alan contracted jaundice just 10 days before his 45th birthday and died. There was a huge shock in the community of Scottish golf. It's likely that his working conditions had an impact on his lungs. The members of the club were hugely saddened, and they subscribed money for his widow and for the production of that portrait, which still hangs in the R&A clubhouse. The R&A Equipment Standards Department, which tests all the manufacturers' clubs and balls to this day in Kings Barnes, is named after Alan Robertson House. Colonel James Ogilvy Fairley was a visionary and dreamed of a national competition. He poached Tom to Prestwick. He'd been captain of the R&A in 1850 and a founder member of Prestwick. He became a kind of mentor to Tom. Tom even named one of his sons after him, calling him Joff. Fairley had set up the Grand National Golf Tournament in St Andrews in 1857. Alan and Tom helped to run that event, although it was fairly shambolic, with teams failing to turn up. It was won by 2 Scots from Blackheath and was a gentleman-only event. It was staged again in the next 2 years. Fairley and his playing partner, the Earl of Eglinton, thought it was time to ditch match play and use stroke play, as it would determine a genuine champion. Archibald Montgomery, the 13th Earl of Eglinton, was one of the most influential figures in Scottish sports in the mid-19th century. Again, captain of Prestwick, as well as the R&A, he was a famed owner of champion horses. He was a keen curler and bowler, and in fact presented Eglinton jugs for these sports. And by 1860, after the death of Allen, he presented the Challenge Belt as a prize for what would become the Open Championship. Now, this photograph dates from 1860 and features Charlie Hunter on the left and Tom Morris on the right. It was taken around 1860, but is not actually from the first Open. What's interesting to me is what they're wearing. They're golfing tartan jackets. This is the same tartan that the Earl of Eglinton clothed his own staff in his estate. The Earl was, as I said, a founding member at Prestwick, and for me, it's almost like the first kind of branded clothing or sponsorship at the Open. By way of honouring Allen, they said that they wanted to find the next champion golfer of Scotland. Letters were sent by Prestwick to 11 clubs: St Andrews, Musselburgh, Brunsfield, Leven, Carnoustie Panmure, Montrose, Perth and Blackheath and North Berwick. In the letter it said, send your best players, not exceeding 3 in number, and that they must be known and respectable caddies. They were also expected to show a certificate of respectability from the treasurer of their golf clubs, as they didn't want any objectionable characters. This impacted numbers, and so only 6 made the journey, with Tom and Charlie making up the entry to 8 players. The first championship was held on the 17th of October 1860 and played accordingly to the rules of Prestwick. The Challenge Belt cost £25 and was eventually paid up by the club members. There was no cash money prize for the winner, again, which would have impacted numbers, as more lucrative money matches would have been held elsewhere. They played 3 rounds of a dozen holes on Tom's 12-hole course, with a break for lunch at the local pub, the Red Lion. Bookmakers, of course, had Tom as the favourite as he laid out the course, but it wasn't like it is today. Golfers were a bit of an inconvenience for members at Prestwick, but the event was properly run with a committee, rules, and it was advertised in the newspapers. Old Tom, although the favourite, was beaten by his great rival, Willie Park Sr. of Musselburgh. However, he'd go on to win 4 times in total, but it was his son, young Tom Morris, it was Tommy who would do what no one else could do. He won the belt outright in 1870, having won 3 consecutive times. This meant that they were without a prize for the championship, and so it didn't take place in 1871. By the following year, they had commissioned the claret jug, but it wasn't ready for the championship. A gold medal was produced for the winner, and it was Tommy who won for a 4th time in 1872, and this is his gold medal again, which is on display in our museum. The claret jug, if we look at the trophy now, is made in Edinburgh by Mackay, Cunningham and Company. We must have think of why they selected a jug as the trophy. The Earl of Eglinton had chosen jugs for other competitions, and similar styles of silver jugs were used to serve the favoured drink in Scotland at the time, claret. Scotland had close relationships with France and had access to import Burgundy wines. The Greek and Roman gods associated with victory and wine and celebration, and Bacchus and Dionysus could be the face on the handle of the trophy. There is even a satyr, a human-goat mixture, in the lid of the trophy. It's really unlike any other major sports trophies. Tommy's name is engraved first on the belly of the trophy, but it was first presented when the championship moved from Prestwick to St Andrews in 1873. Local caddy Tom Kidd was the champion that year, and his name is featured in the engraving just under Tom's. I pass this house every day on my way to work. This is in North Street in St Andrews, and it's where tragedy struck for young Tom Morris. On the 11th of September 1875, when he and his father were at North Berwick playing a golf match, his wife Margaret Drinnan went into labour. He got a telegram to say that she had gone into labour and then later that was going into difficulties. Tommy raced to get back to St Andrews, hiring a ship to take him back, a boat to take him back to the town, and then ran all the way up North Street to sadly be greeted by the minister at the door, saying that his poor wife Margaret and child died in childbirth. Tommy never recovered, and just 4 months later, he himself was found dead by his father Tom on Christmas morning. He died at the age of just 24. The cause of death was a ruptured aneurysm in the back of his chest. The locals said that he died of a broken heart. Such was Tommy's repute that the newspapers nationally reported his death with mourning and sadness. What could he have achieved in his life? Look what he did in just 24 years. Tom's sadness extended when his own wife Nancy died the following year. Tom's career carried on after Tommy and Nancy's passing, although quality was not what it used to be. He was still able to play a good golf on occasions and could even beat a champion golfer well into his 70s. His design of golf courses also became more prominent, from Anstruther to Royal Portrush, along with fulfilling his duties at the links and continually playing every Open Championship bar two from 1860 to 1896. He would be present for the R&A medals and the captain driving in ceremonies, as well as running his shop on the Links Road, which is now known as the Open Shop. Tom could write letters of support for men in his employment, who would then go on to move around the world. His name carried a huge amount of weight. Even in his own lifetime, he was famous. He was known as the grand old man of golf. This portrait, which hangs in the big room of the clubhouse, was painted by Sir George Read. When it was unveiled, Tom exclaimed that he got the checks in his hat all wrong, but it remains this iconic view of old Tom Morris. He died at the age of 86 after suffering a fall down some stairs at the new golf club in St Andrews. He was taken to the cottage hospital but never recovered. Tom's passing in itself was greeted with tremendous sadness and was national news. Every national British paper wrote about Tom's passing, and almost all ran large features or stories in prominent positions. His funeral, as it says in the book Colossus of Golf, was equally a large occasion. Tom had a funeral that would have graced a head of state. The townspeople of St Andrews said very little about him and merely mourned his passing. Tom was one of them, despite what the world would try to make of him. There were too many mourners to get into the service at St Mary's Church, and there were too many to get within earshot of the grave. His charm and congeniality was legendary, and everyone who visited the town would strive to meet him, from heirs to royal thrones to tourists from around the world. Tom thought that golf should be open to all. A golfer is a golfer, and anyone can play. He wasn't a showman, he was quite reserved, but a great communicator, and he'd speak with anyone. And I think that's why we're all so fascinated with him. He was also responsible for the building of a course for women in St Andrews. Towards the middle of the 19th century, there was a caddies putting green beside the 17th hole, and women golfers began using this and displaced the caddies. But they were generally the daughters of R&A members, and they weren't so happy with their daughters mingling with those caddies. And so they instructed Tom to build a course, now known as the Himalayas, for the ladies to play on. It was initially known as the St Andrews Ladies Golf Club, and it remains the first women's golf club in the world in 1867. It later became known as the Ladies Putting Club of St Andrews. And you can still play as a visitor the 18-hole Himalayas course. Local newspaper reports say that the club struggled initially and the golf strokes were of the putting variety. And you can see from this photograph that the women are wearing corsetry, bustles, hats, and layers of clothing, and likely couldn't actually bend down to lift their own ball out of the hole. And so they would have had young boys to help them do so, young caddies. 19 years after it first started, they had over 500 members. Putting was deemed appropriate for young ladies of the time as it wasn't too strenuous, and it protected their feminine modesty by keeping their ankles and wrists covered. It has been suggested that this ladies' club offered the chance for upper-class women to meet suitable young men in an appropriate environment. And while that could be the case, it doesn't take away from the women's love of the game. Also on screen is the women's first medal from 1867, which again is on display in our museum. The formation of the Ladies' Golf Union in 1893 and their first national competition created a legacy within the sport that is still felt today. Women in Britain had the ability to compete formally, as well as creating the first national handicapping system, which was later adopted by male clubs as well. Women across the world were inspired by these early champions, as well as the union administrators themselves, and had affiliated unions across the Commonwealth. There is so much more to say about the growth and development of the women's game, but I will leave that till another time. The great golfing boom began to pick up momentum in 1886 and continued at a great pace until the beginning of World War I. In the decade between 1886 and 1895, about 800 new clubs were formed, and over 600 of these had their own course. The introduction of safety bicycles in the 1880s and then the motor car shortened the travel time to golf courses. Car ownership grew rapidly from 8,000 in 1904 to 132,000 in 1914. But of course, it was still the railways which would have a huge impact on the growth of the sport in terms of participation as well as spectation. Traditionally, golf has been played on links courses, as I mentioned, their basic shape and hazards being largely determined by nature. Early designers such as Tom Morris largely set out their courses using the existing landscape. During the Great Golfing Boom, they soon realised that they could create courses that were a bit more challenging and use inland spaces. The skill of golf course design reached a new level around the turn of the century when four pioneers emerged: Willie Park Jr., Harry Colt, Herbert Fowler, and J.F. Abercrombie, who made their mark in Britain and overseas. They took to modifying the landscape to suit golf. Sometimes known as the Heathland Quartet, these designers planned and constructed their courses with golf holes that looked natural and played well. However, in the large number of courses that were constructed to full demand, many continued to be built without a good understanding of the principles involved. Over 1,700 golf courses were built in Britain between 1870 and 1914. They were mainly inland and mainly 9 holes. Golf was frequently played throughout the British Empire in the 18th century on an informal basis by military men, civil servants, and merchants. In the early 19th century, formal golf clubs were established in India, with Royal Calcutta being the first outside of Europe. And by the 1870s, there were also golf clubs in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. The first European golf club to be founded was the fashionable resort at Pau in the south of France in 1856. As mentioned previously, there are early references to golf in America, but it's not until 1888 that we start to see the formal golf taking root at the St. Andrews Golf Club. It rapidly spread throughout the United States, so that by the end of the century, there were about 1,000 active golf clubs. The United States Golf Association was founded in 1894, and the first US Amateur and Open Championships were held the following year. By 1900, there were national amateur competitions for men in India, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and South Africa, as well as Britain and the United States. By 1914, at least 16 nations were holding national amateur championships for men, and at least 11 held ladies' competitions. As well as the Open Championship, by 1912, a player could participate in 9 different Open Championships, including 4 in mainland Europe, 2 in North America, 1 in South America, and 1 in South Africa, and 1 in Australia. Golf was now a thriving international game. A natural place to end this look at the development of golf is in 1914, with the coming of the First World War. Society and golf was forever altered after the Great War. And I believe that we can perhaps look at that for another day. I hope you've enjoyed my lecture this evening. There's much still to discuss and debate, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But thank you very much for listening.
Great. Hannah, thank you so much. Very informative, very interesting indeed. We've got a couple minutes left and a few questions in the Q&A
Okay,
box. If
I'll
you
stop
can,
sharing my screen so that I can see the chat box.
so it's in Q&A.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Tim, is it fair to say that golf may have had an easier time getting started because it was using unproductive space between the funny how those strips along? Yeah, yes, I believe so. Um, so the links land wasn't really good for building on or for growing crops because it's so sandy. It was used by farmers to graze their sheep and their cattle, that kind of thing. But because this land wasn't being used for other purposes, it was a recreation land. And the people who owned it had the time to do so. So the gentlemen golfers had the time to use this links land. That's my impression of it. Um, Thank you, Sally and Phil. That's really nice. With no grooming of early courses, did rules allow placement of balls? Now, I Jan, I'm not exactly sure on the on that. I know that I'm not a rules historian, but that's one for my colleague Neil Miller, who is on the Rules of Golf Committee, and I will ask him. And perhaps something to research. Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much. Would you talk about the R&A Clubhouse? Of course, I can briefly, let me go, I can go back to the screen very quickly and just back to my presentation, and I'll talk about that. So how do I go back? Oh, no, I have to go all the way through. I'll actually just come out because it'll get confusing. So the members of the society would meet, as I mentioned, in pubs and taverns across the town. And then a member, captain of the club, Provost of St Andrews, Sir Hugh Lyon Playfair, had the idea of building a clubhouse. They did meet in a position that was a gentleman's club where, if you know the skyline of St Andrews, it's the big red building that's visible in the Chariots of Fire film, Hampton Grand. There was a cottage that was there that was known as the Union Parlour, and golfers would meet there prior to the round. They could store their clubs there, but it wasn't a golf club. The R&A members subscribed money and purchased the land for the building of the clubhouse in 1853, and it was opened the following year in 1854. And it was a very basic H-shaped building. The clubhouse is done by, or built and designed by the town's first architect, George Ray. He worked on other buildings across the town of St Andrews, including Playfair's Terrace, which is named after Sir Hugh Lyon Playfair. And they did it in this classical style. Playfair was an officer and based it in the army and based it on the idea of an officer's mess. There was space for a bar, there was space for gathering, a dining room, there was space for billiards and just enjoying yourself. The clubhouse has changed and been and grown and developed and continues to change. And just in the last 2 years, we've had an extension underneath the building to create better facilities for members, for golf club members. And so there are changing rooms, new changing rooms, and it was an exciting process to be part of, to see another stage of development for the clubhouse.
Great.
I hope that's
And
all
I
the
believe
questions.
Ken, I think you have a question, do you? And then
Yeah, I have actually two questions, but maybe we can get them in quick. Number one is, in the early days when tournaments started up and other clubs started to get involved, well, there's that whole question about when did golf go to 18 holes? When did that become the standard? But in early years, I mean, were different tournaments different lengths? Was there any uniformity there at all, or did that await kind of final decisions as to structure and everything for the industry in general?
I think if we have to think about it in terms of in Scottish golf, clubs would often make holes, make courses that were appropriate to the land that they had available. So Tom and the first Open took place on 12 holes. And so it wasn't a set standard of 18 holes. That comes a wee bit later with the R&A kind of formalizing the championship and the rules becoming a bit more formal with the introduction of the rules of golf committee and the standards of etiquette in the early 1900s. Obviously, with St Andrews, we started, as I mentioned, with 22 holes. And it was shortened by Alan Robertson and Tom because there was such busyness on the course. It was such a congested course, and they made it 18 holes, and that became the standard across the world because I think even at that point, St Andrews was looked down as the kind of guardians of the sport, and whilst not perhaps officially a governing body at that point, people looked to them for the rules um, for running championships and
Yeah.
inspiration.
So it was the R&A, in fact, that basically established a standard of 18 eventually.
Certainly, it was under instruction from the R&A members and working with Alan to reduce the congestion on the old course or the first course, Pelmore Links. But we still see courses and clubs and championships and tournaments played around the world on smaller courses and just what was available to the clubs themselves. It's not until as I say, until we get to about the 1900s that we start to see a more formalized kind of committee that looks at the Open Championship, that say looks at advising championship golf in that way. But what's fascinating to me is that links golf moves all the time. We think of this land as at the moment as eroding, sandy coastal courses, but there's actually the course has always changed. The holes have always kind of moved with the sand, and actually that's more evident in other parts of Scotland. And if, say, a hole was lost into the sea, they would just move the course a little bit and change the whole layout. And that happened more than you would think. And the changes to the old course have always taken place for the Open Championship, for the Amateur Championship, for various other events. And so it's always a continual moving thing, this links land that we play on. And yes, we have to be aware now of our techniques of looking after courses and caring for the environment, but it's still continually moving and gaining land and losing land all the time.
Thanks.
Great, Hannah. Thank you so much. Great job. Super fascinating and informative. So just leaves me to say a great big thank you from the Alumni Golfers Association and MIT alumni in general. And so nice to hear from you and to learn so much about the royal and ancient game. So thank you so much indeed.
Thank you so
Have a
much,
good evening.
everybody. And
Thank
you're all
you.
welcome to St Andrews. Just come and ask for me.
Terrific.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you to
you.
everybody else who's attended. Have a good day.